The babies screamed as they were torn from their mother's arms. To perfect children, born within minutes of each other. But in that moment, in that village, they weren't miracles, they were curses, death sentences written in tiny heartbeats. The village elder raised his hand, and silence fell like a stone into water. These twins would not see another sunrise. And for hundreds of years, the world believed this was just another African myth. Just another brutal story from a barbaric past. They were wrong. What if I told you that some of the most incredible stories from African history, stories that scholars dismissed as impossible myths, were actually real? What if I told you there was a wall in Africa that made the Great Wall of China look like a backyard fence? What if I told you that the killing of twins wasn't just some made-up horror story, but a documented practice that shaped entire civilizations? Today, I'm going to show you 5 African myths that turned out to be absolutely, terrifyingly true, and by the end of this video, you'll question everything you thought you knew about African history. Let me take you back to 1850s Nigeria. A Scottish missionary named Mary Slessor arrives in a place called Calabar. She's expecting to spread the word of God, maybe build a school. She's not expecting to witness something that will haunt her for the rest of her life. The woman in labor has been screaming 4 hours. The entire village waits outside the hut. But they're not waiting with joy, they're waiting with terror. Because if what comes out of that hut is twins, those babies will be dead before the sun sets. For decades, Western historians dismissed these accounts as missionary propaganda. Africans don't actually kill babies, they said. This is just colonial racism designed to make Africans look savage. But they were wrong. Recent academic research has introduced extensive data on historic twin infanticide across 23 African countries, confirming what those missionaries witnessed was not propaganda. It was documentation of a real cultural practice that spans centuries. The Igbo people of southeastern Nigeria believed twins were supernatural beings, not gods, demons. In parts of Nigeria, twins were previously regarded as bad omens and were promptly killed at birth. The reasoning was terrifying in its logic. Humans give birth to 1 child at a time. Only animals have litters. Therefore, if a woman births twins, she must have mated with a spirit or committed an unforgivable sin. But here's where it gets even darker. The mother had 2 choices: watch her babies die, or be exiled with them into the forest where they would all starve to death together. Most chose exile, most died. Mary Slessor couldn't stand it. This small Scottish woman started taking in the abandoned twin babies, raising them herself. The local chiefs warned her. She was cursing herself. The spirits of the twins would bring her nothing but misery. But something incredible happened. The twins she raised grew up healthy, successful, normal. Word spread through the villages. Maybe, just maybe, these weren't demons after all. Even the Yoruba people, who eventually came to see twins as of great importance and developed an entire cult around them, still had evidence of twin infanticide in various communities. The transformation from killing twins to worshipping them didn't happen overnight. It took generations of proof that these children weren't cursed. Anthropologists have proposed different theories for why twin killing existed. Either twins indicated the mother had cheated or committed a great sin, or the practice asserted that humans were different from animals, which commonly have multiple births. The horrifying truth is that thousands of twins died because of this belief. Archaeological evidence from burial sites shows tiny skeletons, always in pairs, always newborns. The myth that Westerners thought was too brutal to be real. It was documented, systematic, and widespread. But the most shocking part, some communities still practice twin infanticide well into the 20th century. This wasn't ancient history. This was happening while your grandparents were alive. The question that should keep you up at night: if they were wrong about this being just a myth, what else did they get wrong? But hold on to your seat, because if you think systematic infanticide sounds unbelievable, wait until you discover what happened when Portuguese explorers stumbled across something in the African jungle that shattered everything Europeans thought they knew about civilization itself. Imagine standing at the edge of what looks like endless earthen walls stretching beyond the horizon. You're looking at something that makes every other ancient wonder seem small. But according to history books, this place doesn't exist. According to Western historians, Africans never built anything this magnificent. They lied to you. Construction of the Benin Moat began as early as 800 AD and continued until around 1460 AD, while Europe was stumbling through the Dark Ages. African engineers were creating the largest earthwork structure ever built by human hands. Let me put this in perspective. The Great Wall of China is about 13,000 miles long. Impressive, right? The Wall of Benin was once regarded by the Guinness Book of Records as the longest earthwork created by human hands. We're talking about over 16,000 kilometers of walls and moats. That's 4 times longer than China's Great Wall, but for centuries, this was dismissed as impossible. Africans couldn't have built something like that, European scholars said. They didn't have the technology, they didn't have the organization. It's just another African tall tale. The walls were first discovered by Portuguese explorers and were unfortunately destroyed by the British in 1897 during what has become known as the Benin Expedition. But even before its destruction, European accounts describe something that shouldn't have existed. In 1472, a Portuguese explorer named Redi Sequeira stumbled upon something that shattered everything he thought he knew about African civilization. Massive earthen walls rose up from the forest floor, stretching as far as he could see. Perfectly engineered moats filled with water created an impenetrable defense system. At the time, it was considered the world's largest man-made structure. Let that sink in. Not the largest in Africa. The largest in the world, the Portuguese sailor wrote in his journal. These walls are so enormous and well constructed that they make the fortifications of our greatest European cities look like children's sandcastles. But when these journals made it back to Europe, scholars refused to believe them. The accounts were dismissed as exaggeration or outright fantasy. The Kingdom of Benin was an important African kingdom that flourished between the 13th and 19th centuries AD, with the wall built around 1010 AD, around the same time as Angkor Wat in Cambodia. The engineering was beyond anything Europe could imagine at the time. The structure comprised of moats and walls that took over 650 years to complete, from 800 AD to around 1460. Imagine a construction project that spans 650 years. The Great Pyramid of Giza took 20 years. This was 32 times longer. But here's where it gets personal. The British didn't just discover the Great Wall of Benin, they systematically destroyed it. In 1897, during the Benin Expedition, British forces didn't just loot the famous Benin bronzes. They used dynamite to blow up sections of the walls they filled in the moats. They tried to erase all evidence that this incredible structure had ever existed. Why? Because its existence proved that everything they'd been saying about African civilization was a lie. If Africans could build something this sophisticated, something that dwarfed European achievements, then the entire justification for colonialism crumbled. Today, only scattered sections remain, overgrown, forgotten, but satellite imaging has confirmed what those Portuguese explorers saw 500 years ago. The outlines are still there, scarred into the earth like evidence of a crime. The myth that Africans never built great civilizations. It was built on the systematic destruction of proof that they absolutely did. What else did they destroy? What other evidence did they bury? Just when you think the conspiracy to hide African greatness couldn't get more sinister, let me tell you about the time European archaeologists literally made it illegal to suggest that black people could build sophisticated cities. And the evidence they tried to bury will absolutely blow your mind. The ruins stretched across the landscape like something from another world. Massive stone walls built without mortar, fitting together so perfectly that you couldn't slide a knife blade between the blocks. towers that scraped the African sky, a city that could house 18,000 people at its peak. But according to European colonial authorities in the early 1900s, this was impossible. Africans didn't build cities like this. They couldn't have. So they decided these ruins must have been built by someone else, anyone else. The theories they came up with were insane. Phoenicians, Arabs, lost tribes of Israel, even aliens. Literally anything except the obvious truth that indigenous Africans had built one of the most sophisticated cities in the medieval world. The colonial government of Rhodesia went so far as to make it illegal to suggest that black Africans had built Great Zimbabwe. Archaeologists who published evidence supporting African construction were banned from the country. Academic papers were suppressed. Evidence was destroyed. They called it the Great Zimbabwe Controversy, but it wasn't a controversy. It was a cover-up. Great Zimbabwe was built between 1100 and 1450 AD by the ancestors of the modern Shona people. At its height, it controlled trade routes that stretched from the Indian Ocean to the heart of Africa. Gold, ivory, and other precious goods flowed through this city, making its rulers incredibly wealthy. The engineering was extraordinary. The great enclosure, with its 36-foot-high walls, was built using a technique called dry stone construction. No mortar, no cement, just perfectly cut stones fitted together with mathematical precision. The walls have stood for over 800 years without maintenance. Inside the city, archaeologists have found evidence of incredible sophistication, advanced metallurgy, elaborate pottery, jewelry that rivals anything produced in medieval Europe. Trade goods from China, Persia, and India prove this wasn't some isolated African outpost. It was a major player in the global economy. But the most incredible discovery was the Zimbabwe birds, 8 carved soapstone birds that sat atop pillars throughout the city. These weren't just decorative, they were symbols of royal authority, representing the connection between the earthly rulers and the spiritual world. When European colonists found Great Zimbabwe, they immediately began looting these artifacts. Most of the Zimbabwe birds ended up in private collections or European museums. It took decades of legal battles for Zimbabwe to recover even a few of them after independence. The systematic denial of African achievement at Great Zimbabwe was so thorough that even today, many people have never heard of it. Despite being one of the most impressive archaeological sites in Africa, it's rarely mentioned in world history courses, but the evidence was always there. Portuguese traders who visited the region in the 16th century with about powerful African kingdoms with stone cities. Arab geographers describe the wealth and sophistication of the interior African civilizations. The myth that these accounts were exaggerated or false was created by people who had a vested interest in portraying Africans as primitive. If Africans could build cities like Great Zimbabwe, how could colonialism be justified? The name Zimbabwe itself means houses of stone in the Shona language. When the country gained independence in 1980, they chose this name specifically to reclaim their suppressed history. But here's what should terrify you. If they could successfully hide and deny something as massive and obvious as Great Zimbabwe for almost a century, what smaller, more subtle lies have they convinced us are true? What other incredible African achievements are sitting in plain sight, dismissed as impossible myths? Yet somehow, the audacity to erase African civilizations gets even more brazen. Because while they were busy convincing the world that Africans couldn't build cities, they were simultaneously covering up something that would make your jaw drop. African women who didn't just rule kingdoms, but conquered the mighty Roman Empire itself. The Tomb Raider's torch flickered against the sandstone walls as she descended deeper into the pyramid. This wasn't Egypt, this was Sudan, and according to every history book she'd ever read, there were no pharaohs here, no great kingdoms, just empty desert and primitive tribes. The hieroglyphics covering the walls told a different story. For over a century, Archaeologists dismissed reports of pyramids in Sudan as wishful thinking. Africans south of Egypt didn't build pyramids. They insisted. They didn't have pharaohs. They didn't conquer Egypt. These stories are just African fantasies trying to claim Egyptian glory. They were spectacularly wrong. Hidden in the Sudanese desert lie more pyramids than in all of Egypt. Not replicas, not copies. Original pyramids built by black African pharaohs who ruled Egypt for nearly a century. The kingdom of Kush, centered in what's now Sudan, produced some of the most powerful rulers in ancient history. And here's what will blow your mind. Many of them were women. Warrior queens who commanded vast armies and ruled with absolute authority. Queen Amenarines was one of them. Around 24 BC, she led her armies against the mighty Roman Empire. Not defensive battles, full-scale invasions. Her forces marched into Roman-controlled Egypt, captured Roman forts, and sent Emperor Augustus a message that would make modern diplomats blush. But Western historians buried her story for centuries. A black African woman defeating Roman legions? Impossible. It had to be mythology. Then archaeologists started digging in earnest in the 20th century. They found her palace. They found inscriptions describing her victories. They found Roman historical records that confirmed everything the African oral traditions had been saying. The Romans called her the One-Eyed Queen because she lost an eye in battle fighting their forces. Roman historians wrote about her with a mixture of fear and grudging respect. Emperor Augustus himself negotiated a peace treaty with her, one of the few times Rome backed down from a conflict. But the most incredible discovery came in the 1960s. Archaeologists found the tomb of Queen Omonishiketo, another Kushite queen. Inside were over 20 kilograms of pure gold jewelry, elaborate crowns, ceremonial weapons, art that rivaled anything found in Egyptian tombs. The artifacts proved these weren't primitive tribal leaders playing dress-up. These were sophisticated rulers of a wealthy, technologically advanced civilization. The quality of their metalwork, their architecture, their art, it was on par with Rome and Egypt at their peaks. But here's the part that will make your blood boil. Much of Queen Omonishiketo's treasure was looted by Italian treasure hunter Giuseppe Fellini in the 1830s. He used dynamite to blow up her pyramid, scattering priceless artifacts. What survived is now scattered across European museums, displayed as curiosities with little context about the incredible civilization that created them. The Kushite pharaohs ruled Egypt from 744 to 656 BC. They were invaders or usurpers. They were invited to rule by Egyptian priests who saw their neighbors to the south as more faithful to ancient Egyptian traditions than Egypt's own rulers. For almost a century, black African pharaohs ruled one of the world's greatest civilizations. They built temples, commissioned art, and expanded trade networks that stretched from the Mediterranean to the heart of Africa. But this history was systematically erased. Textbooks that mentioned Egyptian pharaohs skipped over the Kushite dynasty entirely. When they were mentioned at all, they were described as foreign invaders rather than legitimate rulers. The myth that sub-Saharan Africans never built great civilizations was maintained by ignoring the kingdom of Kush entirely. Even today, most people have never heard of Queens Amenarines or Omonishiketo, despite their incredible achievements. If they could hide an entire dynasty of African pharaohs, what else have they hidden from us? The systematic erasure I are about to reveal will leave you questioning everything you've ever been taught about human innovation. Black men watching on. Because while the world was being convinced that Africans couldn't build, couldn't rule, couldn't create, there was one final lie that cut deeper than all the rest. The myth that Africans never invented anything at all. The furnace blazed, turning iron ore into something world-changing. But history says Africans couldn't have figured out iron smelting on their own. Someone must have taught them, right? That someone else's story was another lie designed to rob Africa of its innovations. Recent archaeological discoveries have shattered the myth. that iron technology came to Africa from outside. In multiple locations across the continent, from Nigeria to Rwanda to South Africa, evidence shows that Africans were smelting iron as early as 1000 BC, not learning it from Middle Eastern or European traders. Inventing it independently, the implications are staggering. Iron technology gave Africans better tools, better weapons, and better agricultural implements. It sparked population growth, trade expansion, and the rise of complex societies across the continent. But for decades, this was dismissed as impossible. Iron technology originated in the Middle East, textbooks claimed. It spread to Africa through trade and migration. The idea that Africans could independently innovate was treated as scholarly heresy. The Nok culture in Nigeria was smelting iron 2,500 years ago. Their sophisticated furnaces produced high-quality steel that was traded across West Africa. But when European archaeologists first discovered Nok sites, they assumed the iron artifacts must have been brought in from somewhere else. In Rwanda, archaeologists have found evidence of iron smelting from 2,000 years ago. The techniques were so advanced that they produced steel comparable to what European smiths were making during the Renaissance. Over 1,000 years later, the Haya people of Tanzania developed furnaces that could reach temperatures of 1800 degrees Celsius, hot enough to produce carbon steel. These weren't simple bloomery furnaces. They were sophisticated pieces of engineering that required deep understanding of chemistry and metallurgy. But every time archaeologists uncovered this evidence, it was explained away. Trade contact, outside influence, technology transfer, never independent African innovation. The truth is that Africa was a major center of technological innovation for millennia. The idea that Africans only received technology, never invented it, was a carefully constructed myth designed to justify cultural and economic exploitation. Today, genetic and archaeological evidence proves that iron smelting developed independently in multiple African locations. The continent was enter backwater waiting for outside civilization. It was a hotbed of innovation that influenced the rest of the world. The African Iron Age revolution transformed societies, enabled the rise of great kingdoms, and supported population densities that wouldn't be seen in parts of Europe until the Industrial Revolution. But this story was buried beneath layers of academic racism and colonial propaganda. The myth of African technological dependency was more comfortable for those who profited from exploitation. 5 myths, 5 lies, 5 incredible truths hidden in plain sight for centuries. African mothers did kill twins, not out of barbarism, but out of genuine spiritual terror. The Great Wall of Benin was 4 times longer than China's Great Wall. African queens conquered Roman armies. Great Zimbabwe rivaled medieval European cities. And Africans independently invented iron technology that changed the world. Every single one of these stories was dismissed as impossible, too sophisticated, too advanced, too incredible to be African, but they were all real, which makes me wonder, what else have they hidden from us? What other incredible African achievements are sitting in dusty archives, dismissed as myths too fantastic to believe? The next time someone tells you something about African history sounds too incredible to be true, remember these 5 stories. Remember that the most unbelievable myths often turn out to be the most important truths, and ask yourself, if they lied about this, what else are they lying about?